Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, it's part 5 of our road grader build. Well, we have 4 parts under our belt and the model is looking great. I hope you guys at home have found the information useful and that you're able to make your own models successfully from some of the information and tips that I've been able to provide you. So we're going to carry on, and what we're going to move on to, well, you know what? Let's go look at the plans. Well, I now want to start on making the cab. So I have for the walls, for the 2 side walls, the front wall and the rear wall, they are all 1/4 inch thick. So I've milled some 1/4 inch thick poplar and I have cut it to a little larger than what the plans say to give us a blank to work with. So I have here the 2 pieces for our side walls, and I have this 1 piece here which will be our cab front, and this will be the cab rear. We're actually going to start with the cab rear because it's the easiest piece as there's only a couple of angles. So if we look here on the plans, I've measured these side angles here and found them to be 4 degrees. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this over to the table saw. I'm going to set my miter fence at 4 degrees, and using the dimensions on the plans, making sure that the top of the cab rear panel is 3.5 inches long, I'm going to simply cut this piece to its final dimensions and shape. Now, just like you guys, I'm human. I make mistakes too, and that's why it's a good idea before we carry on to make sure that I did actually measure these angles right. So we're going to take the piece that we cut and just sit it here on the plans and just make sure that the angles do line up. And they do, and that is just fine by me. Looks good. Okay, so we're going to put this piece aside. That's this piece done, the rear panel. So we're now going to move on to the sides of our cab. Now this one here is a little bit different. So the very first thing that we're going to do actually is we're going to tilt our saw blade to 4 degrees in order to give us these angles here on the plan. Once we're done those 4 degree cuts, the top and the bottom, to get our final dimension of 4 7/8, then we're going to deal with the angle at the front of our cab. And once again, if you want to check your measurements and your angles, you can just hold your piece up against the plans and just verify that we have the same size piece with the same angles. And we do. I'm happy with that. So this is where we need to sort of check things. And let me show you what I mean. We'll take our back piece that we cut, and we need to place these sort of in place. Give them a dry fit to make sure that the angles are facing the right way and that everything is lining up. And so far so good. It looks good. So if we're happy with that, what I would do now is I would mark rough angles on the outside of this board to show us roughly where we're going to cut for this angle right here, which I've measured as a 7 degree angle. So I'm just going to mark roughly. This is exaggerated, but it's going to help us to know which way to cut it. And the same on this side. It goes like that, where this is the waist area and this is the waist area. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over to the table saw. I'm going to reset my blade back to 90 degrees. I'm going to set my table saw miter fence at the 7 degrees that I've measured this at. Place some marks on our piece so that we know exactly where we're cutting, and we will cut this angle off of each one of our door panels. Well, the last piece to cut is going to be the cab front panel. So this is the same process. I don't think we need another video of it. The only difference here is that the top and the bottom angles are 7 degrees to match the front angles of our cab sides. As well, the sides of this panel will be angled at 4 degrees. So it's basically exactly what we've already done. We can get this cut, checking against our measurements on the plan itself, holding our pieces on the plan to verify their size and shape. And let's get this rough cut. And at this point, we just want to verify that we're happy with our cuts so far. You want to make sure that you have good connection here, that at the bottom where we cut these 4-degree angles, that they are sitting flush here to our assembly board. And if we spin this around here, that this fits nice and cleanly here, as well as on the inside, that 7-degree angle that we cut there is right, and that it's flush all the way down at the bottom. And it is, so I'm happy with these pieces. So at this point now, what I'm going to do is on the bottom edge where it's going to be a glue joint later, I'm going to label the piece as to what it is, left or right. I'm also going to point an arrow to the outside of each piece so that I don't get confused. Well, I'm going to start off with the front piece of our cab. And truth be told, guys, I'm not going to be using any of the patterns. I'm going to be scaling off the drawing and just duplicating the marks on each piece. The reason for this is very simple. There is a 1/16 inch route that goes on each one of these side panels. And it's very difficult to get a pattern on perfect on these pieces. So if I have the pattern on our side panels, even just slightly askew, our routing, because it's done with a fence up against our back of our cab, that will be square to the body, but our windows won't. And as soon as you put the routing on there, it's going to accentuate the fact that things are crooked. So for that reason, I'm going to scale off the drawing and I'm going to reproduce the marks that are on the cab front panel and the side panels, both the right and the left. Well, I have the front panel all cut out and I've given it a light sanding. If you're going to sand it, be sure that you're not sanding the connecting edges, because we need that crisp edge so that we don't have gaps when we join these together. So be very careful doing any kind of sanding right now. But these two pieces, for all intents and purposes, are done. But these are our side panels, and you can see here I've marked out my 6 cuts that I need to make, and I've also scribbled on them to show that they are waste pieces so I don't get confused when I'm at the saw, because I'm going to be cutting them at the scroll saw. But if we look at the drawing, we have this 1/16 of an inch kerf that we need to route, and while it doesn't give us a depth, in general they are 1/16 of an inch deep. It's just a detail kerf. So let's head over to the router table and I'll show you how we're going to deal with that. Well, what I have here is a 1/16 diameter router bit, a straight bit in here. It is raised to be 1/16 above the table, and I have this auxiliary fence clamped onto my split fence. Guys, for this operation, I don't care how good your router table is. I don't care how expensive your split fence is. Do not use it for this. You can use it as your base, but have a solid surface to support your piece, because any bit of wavering at all is going to make a mess of this. So I've done some test cuts here on some scrap just to verify my measurements. I've fine-tuned it in. And what we're going to do is on the outside of each piece, we are going to very carefully against this fence, run it through on its flat side to get that one routed detail there. We're going to make 2 passes. One pass will do the initial cut. The second pass will clean it out. And now, if you want, you can take a folded piece of sandpaper and put it down in that 1/16 groove and just run it a couple passes. That will just clean up anything on the side. Don't do it much more than a couple passes, guys, 2 or 3, because you'll start distorting that routing. Okay, so with that done, it looks great. Because we did everything after the pieces were cut and verified, and because we drew everything out, Our lines of our windows are exactly parallel to our routing, so it's going to really, again, I've said it here in this build before, this is the difference between a good model and a great model. So what we're going to do now is take this over to the scroll saw, drill some blade entry holes first. We're going to take it over, and I'm very carefully going to cut out all of these windows. And with some careful cutting over at the scroll saw, you end up with this. Well, we're not going to glue it together just yet because we have a couple more pieces to work on, that being the cab floor and the cab top. So why don't we get into making those pieces? We now need to make the cab top, and we can see here that on both the left and the right side there is both a rabbet and a 1/4 inch roundover, very similar to the tank that we did earlier in the build. So what I have here is a blank. I've cut it to its final width. It's at its final thickness, and I've made it a little longer than what I need. So the very first thing I'm going to do, over at the router table with a straight bit raised up 1/4 inch from the surface of the table and protruding out from an auxiliary fence at 1/16 inch, I'm going to route that rabbet on the left and the right side of our cab top. And just like we did with the tank, I have a 1/4 inch roundover bit here. I've removed its guide bearing so that I could get it further in past that rabbet to round off the top edge on both the left and the right side. So I've adjusted the bit, and using the auxiliary fence clamped to the board, which is just a 3/4 inch piece of plywood, guys, I'm going to route that roundover profile on the top edge of the left and right side. Now, in order to finish off this piece, we need to cut this 30-degree angle on the front edge. We're not going to do that just yet. Instead, we're going to turn our attention to the cab floor. What we will do here is we are going to cut a 3/4 inch thick piece of stock to its dimensions of 3 1/4 by 3 7/8 over at the table saw. This one here also has a 30-degree angle right at the front edge. So we may as well cut them at the exact same time instead of tilting our blade back and forth, back and forth. So once we get our cab floor cut to its final dimensions, we'll tilt our blade to 30 degrees and cut both the cab top and the cab floor at the same time. And that would be our cab floor and our cab top finished. There is now a couple more pieces that we need to make for our cab. Although these are all the pieces for the body of the cab itself, we need to make these 4 front lights. And for that, I have some 3/8 inch thick stock here. And while we have our blade set to the 30-degree angle, I've ripped it along its length at 30 degrees. That coincides with the 30 degrees of the front of our cab roof. And because it was cut at the same angle, at the same setting, we know that the pieces are going to match. So now we are going to cut our headlight pieces. And we can see here that at the widest point here, they are 1/4 inch thick. So what we're going to do is set up at the table saw with our blade back at 90 degrees, and we are going to cut these lights 1/4 inch thick, measuring from the point of our 30-degree angle back 1/4 inch, and we will set our fence so that this becomes the offcut on the outside of the blade. That way we can still safely push through this entire piece here with a push stick and not worry about getting these smaller pieces here hung up in the blade. From there, it's all miter box work, guys. Smaller pieces like this are just safer to cut on the miter box, and you can do it rather accurately. So it's the same as we did earlier with our smaller pieces. It'll be a razor saw and a miter box to cut them to their final 1/2 inch width. Well, truth be told, I couldn't just leave them plain, having the access to my laser engraver. So I engraved little LED kind of a layout on it for our lights. And we can glue them onto the front of our cab roof using a 1/16 inch spacer for underneath and a 3/8 one to get the placement of our first light. We'll just put a little dab of glue on the bottom, or on the back rather, just like that. And then we'll place this on our 1/16 inch spacer block, slide it into place. And there we go. There is our first light where it should be. So following the dimensions on the plans, I will continue and mount the rest of the cab roof lights. Well, we can now start assembling our cab. So I have our back piece here. I've given it a sanding, and we have the right side of our cab, and we will just use a straight edge here, line up these pieces, a small little bead of glue, and we'll push them in place. Now we'll make sure that these bottom edges line up. And as well, very important here, you also want to ensure that the back is square to the sides. Okay, and it is. So we'll clean up that little bit of squeeze out there on the inside, and then we can repeat the process to install the front of our cab. And just to make things a little easier for the assembly, we can attach our front to our left side or our driver's side of the cab. If you're in England, reverse what I just said. Just saying, you know. So again, we'll put that in place. Careful alignment. Making sure that we are aligned at this bottom edge. And we'll also ensure that we're square. Well, while we're waiting for the cab sides to dry up, we can glue our tank and our cab floor in place. And I have scaled off this drawing here over on sheet 8. And from what I can see, the tank is 5/32 of an inch away from our engine block, and then the cab is 1/8 away from the tank. So what I'm going to do, centered on both sides, I'll leave those spacers there. I'm going to glue the tank in place. We're going to glue our cab floor in place, and we'll let those pieces set up as well. Well, while I'm waiting for some of these other pieces to dry, I'm going to cut out the steering column. Now, guys, this is such a simple piece. I don't even think it needs instruction. I've cut this on the table saw, its rough dimensions, and then I've scaled off the drawing and drawn out its front kind of profile. The only thing that you may want to be careful of here is you may not notice that the bottom edge, which is only 5/16 of an inch wide, that bottom edge is cut to a 7-degree angle so that it is tight up against the front of the cab and the bottom will sit flush on the floor. That's about the only thing you want to pay attention to here. The rest of it though, I'm just going to cut it on the scroll saw. As for the hole that we need here for the steering wheel, you can level it out here on your drill press fence just like we did with the tank. We'll clamp it in place and we'll drill down once we get the piece cut. And at this point, we can assemble the rest of our cab. Guys, if you're going to use clamps like what I am right here, make sure that they are a light duty clamp. Don't crank on this stuff. The pieces will break, I promise you. So just a little bit of glue on this back piece right here. And then another little bit on these two front pieces, there and there. And then we can very carefully line things up and glue them together. Okay, we can let that set up. Be sure to clean out your squeeze out, guys, and also check it for square. Okay, and we'll just do a dry fit here of the roof. Everything's looking good. I like the way that looks. So there we go. There's the cab pretty much done. We also have this steering column here, and truth be told, I added a little bit of laser engraving to that as well. And we can, once we get our hole for our steering wheel drilled, we can also glue that in place right here in the front of our cab. So looking good here. All right. So at this point now, what I would do, what I would suggest is that we will get the main body that we glued our cab floor into, and we can glue this cab body onto that floor. Well, with the cab and the steering column glued into place, I'm going to leave the roof off for now, even though we have it ready to go with our lights installed on the front of it. We still have a couple little accessories like the back beacon, but I don't want to put it on just yet because we still have to mount the seat on the inside of here, and I'd rather have full access. But what I am going to do is at this point, I'm going to take our front main arm assembly and we're going to mount it here. Now that we have our cab floor in place, we can very easily place it here right up tight to the, there we go, to the cab floor and to the base of our vehicle. And we can glue this in place and put it aside and let it dry. And unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for this week, guys, but we have made some incredible progress. This thing is really coming together, and we're really coming into the home stretch of the whole build now with the little smaller details and that sort of thing. And of course, we've got the wheels coming up that we still need to make, which is one of my favorite parts of the build to figure out and to construct. So I hope you're looking forward to that. Guys, if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. You click that bell and you're not going to miss the notifications of future episodes of the program. I hope that you guys have enjoyed the build up until now. I hope that you're following along at home and getting a few tips, even if you're an accomplished woodworker and someone who's experienced with making these models. I hope that you're able to pick out a few little tips along the way that could help you with your model building. And guys, more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.